On March 30, 1976, thousands of Palestinians demonstrated against Israeli government's confiscation of 21,000 dunams, i.e., 5,189 acres of Palestinian lands. The occupying country responded to the protest by killing 6 young Palestinians. Since then, Palestinians all over the world mark Land Day. Today, 43 days later, Palestinians are still protesting as thousands of people take to the border between Israel and blockaded Gaza Strip, demanding the return of Palestinian refugees to their rightful land from where they were displaced by Israel. Related, emboldened by Trump's move on Golan, Netanyahu to annex West Bank if re-elected, report the 43rd Land Day marks the first anniversary of the Great March of Return, which was started on March 30, 2018. In a year of the March of Return weekly protests, more than 200 Palestinians were killed at the hands of Israeli occupying forces. But this persistent motivation behind such organized demonstrations comes in part as a rejection to the Israeli military blockade against Gaza that was imposed more than 12 years ago in summer 2007, just months after the United States and Israel orchestrated a Fateh-staged coup against the democratically elected Islamic resistance movement Hamas in Palestine. Elliott Abrams, the convicted war criminal and the man U.S. President Donald Trump appointed to lead his regime change ambitions in Venezuela, was one of the masterminds of that very coup against Hamas that led to the civil war between the two biggest Palestinian factions, the repercussions which continue to be felt to this day. In 2006 legislative elections, Hamas was victorious. This did not sit well with Israel and the U.S. Due to Hamas' pro-resistance agenda in the fight for Palestine. Unlike Fateh's more compromising approach, what ensued was a coup against a democratically elected government with U.S. backing, much like the current situation in Venezuela. Not surprisingly, in both situations, Elliott Abrams is the main man behind the coups. In 2007, the then U.S. President George Bush, the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, and the then Deputy National Security Advisor Elliott Abrams, devised a plan to overthrow Hamas using Fateh. Opinion, to be gassed or not to be gassed, that is the question. There were severe fissures among neoconservatives over this. David Wurmser, a former Middle East advisor to the Vice President, Dick Cheney, said at that time, adding, "We were ripping each other to pieces." Wurmser resigned weeks after the bloody clash between Fateh and Hamas started in 2007. The world powers started a discourse saying that this was a coup by Hamas. It looks to me that what happened wasn't so much a coup by Hamas but an attempted coup by Fateh that was preempted before it could happen. Wurmser said, the 2006 Palestinian elections had challenged Bush's Middle Eastern policy of having a pro-Western government in the region. When that was not achieved, the North American country with its ally Israel started channeling money and weapons to militias loyal to Fateh, to train them for an armed coup. Rice also sent an order to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas saying, "You should make clear your intention to declare a state of emergency and form an emergency government." Meanwhile, Abrams, an ardent pro-Israel diplomat, also met a group of Palestinian businessmen and spoke for a need for a hard coup against Hamas. In a report on the events of the coup in 2007 by the Palestinian Chronicle, Palestinians who were at the meeting said Abrams was unshakable in his determination to oust Hamas. The Palestinians suggested a more diplomatic approach to Hamas out of fear that a confrontation would bring more suffering to Gaza's already impoverished population. Abrams dismissed their concerns by claiming that it wouldn't be the fault of the U.S. If that happened, the U.S. also persuaded Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to offer training grounds. Also, a leaked report by UN's Middle East envoy Alvaro de Soto at the time of those events revealed that Abrams threatened after the Hamas election victory to cut U.S. contributions to the UN. If it did not vote in favor of a suspension in aid to the Palestinian Authority by the quartet, made up of the UN, the US, the EU, and Russia. Related, genocide survivors demand Elliott Abrams leave Holocaust Committee board. Hamas proved quite resilient and held its ground after they fled to Gaza and formed their own government there. But the Bush administration was not happy. They tried to lure Palestinians to rally behind Fatah by giving a 3-month amnesty for 178 so-called militants in the West Bank, the release of 250 prisoners, out of $11,190 million in aid, mostly recycled from already allocated non-dispersed aid. The Abrams-planned Palestinian conflict between the two most powerful and popular factions in Palestine continues to this day with no feasible solution in sight. The brutal military blockade by Israel and Egypt on the Gaza Strip is a direct result of the coup as it was imposed on the Palestinian territory after Hamas set up its government there in defiance of U.S. Israeli wishes. Civil war between Hamas and Fatah succeeded mainly in sowing division among Palestinians themselves, weakening their efforts of resistance and struggle against the Israeli colonial machine, but such turn of events is far from surprising considering Abrams' pro-regime change history. Abrams, after intervening in Central America in the 1990s, turned his focus to the Middle East. He was one of the main people behind the U.S. invasion in Iraq in 2003, which saw the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, destruction of much of the country and the death of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis as a direct result of the war. Abrams was also the main person behind the Iran-Contra scandal during U.S. President Ronald Reagan's administration in the 1980s, where the U.S. illegally sent arms to anti-Sandinista militias in Nicaragua to overthrow the government. He was later convicted for lying to the Congress about his role but was later pardoned by President Bush. His first high-profile positions started with the Ronald Reagan administration in the 1980s when he ensured military aid to the Guatemalan dictator Efraín Ríos Montt, who came to power after a coup in 1982 and was later sentenced for genocide against the Mayan peoples in the Central American country. He was also one of the masterminds behind the 2002 coup attempt against Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Recently, he was appointed to lead the U.S. intervention in Venezuela against the leftist government of Nicolas Maduro in an effort to install a U.S.-backed right-wing politician named Juan Guaido.